Canadian law says if a landed immigrant shows a pattern of criminality, a court can order him deported back to his country of origin. And that is just what has happened with a number of Somali-born men, some of them from Ottawa. The documents are signed and the deportation orders issued. But it's not easy to deport people to a country as dangerous as Somalia, with the result that a number of these men are now in legal limbo. Evan Dyer has been looking into this. He joins me this morning in the studio. Evan, good morning.
Good morning, Kathleen.
So what kind of criminals are we talking about here?
We're talking about 11 people. Many of them have committed fairly petty crimes, but some certainly are bad people by any definition. I think the most notorious local example would be Ali Abadir, who was convicted of beating a legally blind woman in Centertown so badly that she required brain surgery and lost a significant part of her memory too.
Where is Abadir now?
He's in Lindsay Correctional Institute near Toronto, last I checked. He finished his sentence for this assault quite a while ago, actually, but he can't be released because he's being ordered deported as a criminal. And yet, at the same time, he can't be deported because there's no one at the other end to accept him when he arrives in Somalia. So he's in a kind of limbo. He actually wants to leave the country. And in fact, I think the one thing that Ali Abadir and the wider Somali community both agree on is that they both want Ali Abadir out of Canada. Somali Canadians, I found, don't have much more sympathy for the deportees than the wider Canadian society. Here's Ahmed Hussein of the Canadian Somali Congress.
The ages range from 6 months to 5 years old when they arrived in Canada. So they don't really have much of a recollection about Somalia, about the people there, about the culture, and especially about the difficult living conditions in Somalia. So it would be very, very hard for them to deal with that situation. However, you know, they had the chance to integrate into the society. They've had their day in court, they've had lawyers, they've had fair trials. So the law is the law.
I guess the one caveat that Hussein would put on this is that the deportations need to be carried out, but in such a way that the deportee's life is not at risk.
Okay, and let's talk about that. What are the dangers in Somalia?
Well, Somalia, of course, is in a state of chaos. It hasn't had a real government for 20 years. I think the only country in the world, really, that has no government. There are actually some people holed up in the presidential palace who call themselves a government, but they control just a few blocks around that building. Much of the rest is under the control of Shabab, which is a militia that's allied itself to Al-Qaeda. And Mogadishu has basically emptied out of civilians, and most of the people who used to live there are now out in the desert. Many of them are just living under blankets spread over bushes, on the verge of starvation. And of course, anyone in the country who's suspected of having money or relatives overseas is a target for extortion and kidnapping.
And so given all of that, and keeping that in mind, have you spoken to any of these men who are being deported or their families and how they feel about the prospects?
Yes, I spoke with a man called Abdi Farah. He's the father of Omar Ahmed, who is a deportee who we actually believe is now en route to Somalia at this moment. Now, Canada Border Service Agency won't confirm that because they don't do that until the deportation is actually completed, which would probably take a few days. But Omar Ahmed grew up here in Ottawa. He went to Ridgemont High. He doesn't have the violent criminal history of Abadir. His record is mostly for things like mischiefs and failures to appear breaches. But he did sign a paper acknowledging that he was a member of the Ledbury Band of Crips. Omar's father, Abdi, actually lost his last remaining brother in Somalia just a few weeks ago in fighting. And now, of course, his son is going back to the same place, but he says he's accepted it.
We decide, him and I, you see what you're doing here, your life, you don't succeed, so you have to go back. And he said, okay. I was happy with it. It is very hard for him to live there. But if he survive, he may understand, because there is some family still remaining there. They survive. They lost all their loved ones. So he's going to be one of them if he's alive.
If he's alive.
Yeah.
Do the deportees even understand that the dangers of the country they're returning to?
Apparently some do better than others, you know, not the way the older people do. The older generation really understand it. They remember it in person. They see these kids, these deportees, as people who were play acting at gangsters here in Canada. And you'll hear them say, you know, wait till you get to Somalia. Then you're going to see what a real gang is. You know, if you think you're a tough guy here, wait till you get to Somalia. You're going to see what it feels like to be a victim. Let me just play you a bit of a conversation that I had with Abdi Farah, the father we heard there from, and Faisal Jama. Jama is a court interpreter who's volunteering to help the deportees' families through the system.
They've been raised and grown up in Canada, and they couldn't meet with their chances They didn't take the opportunity they found, whatever reason is it.
But they believe they are Canadian.
They believe they are Canadians, yeah. But they don't have any other alternative, because as long as they will stay illegally in Canada, so what is the benefit?
Do you think that they really understand how difficult life is in Somalia, how dangerous life is in Somalia?
Some of them they knew, some have no idea about it.
They're going to get a hell of a shock when they get off the plane.
Yeah. Some they have no clue what is Somalia, how it looks, what is going on there. This is their fate. To me, fate is fate. You cannot run from fate.
You know, Evan, it sounds, at least from those voices, that at least some members of the community are resigned to the inevitability of the necessity of these deportations in spite of the dangers.
Yes, I think they are. I mean, they have accepted the principle of deportation, but they are very concerned with the issue of exactly where in Somalia. This is very important to the community. And Canada has successfully deported people to Somalia in the past, but they used to go to one of two regions in the north of the country. One is Somaliland, which has declared itself independent. It's a lot more stable than Rump Somalia. And then the other is Puntland, an autonomous region of northern Somalia. Notorious for pirates, actually, but in spite of that, by Somali standards, considered safe. And it also used to accept deportees, but both are now refusing to do that.
And why is that?
Well, they've just had enough of Western deportees, and it seems actually there's already a large unintegrated group of deportees from here, from Holland and elsewhere, who are in those two places and basically just sit around drinking beer, chewing the local drug cat, and sponging remittances from home from their family members left behind in the West.
So then, how is the Canadian government handling the situation?
Well, it's just one of the many complications of dealing with Somalia, because Canadian government officials aren't even allowed to enter Somali airspace of any region. That means that the last leg of a deportation to Somalia always has to be outsourced. Usually it's actually Kenyans who do it. But now that Puntland and Somaliland are closed, that only leaves southern and central Somalia, which is in a state of complete anarchy, and the community says it doesn't want anyone deported there. So CBSA says it does make an effort to put Somalis back in a place where they'll be among their own clan, at least not their deadliest enemies, but they don't have an obligation. They keep their options open with regards to where people go. And that's why Abdi Farah is so worried that his son, who's originally from Puntland, will instead get dropped in Mogadishu. And Farah says one of the reasons that his son actually agreed to be deported and signed papers waiving his right to appeals was because he thought he was going to Puntland.
We have agreement. So after that, I thought my son is safe. You know Somalia. It's a chaos. There's no Somalia anymore, United Somalia. So the only place you stay, it's a place your own family live. If you take him back, he's supposed to go back to Puntland. If he dies in Mogadishu, I may get, heart attack. We know there's no tribe for him. There's no anybody for him. So if you put down there, just like that. But Puntland, if he dies with his tribe.
So, Evan, then what is the government saying about where it's sending Omar Ahmed?
Well, the latest his father says he heard is that the CBSA agents are going to try to get him to the north. But they've chosen an unusual itinerary, he says, which goes through Mogadishu. And that makes him suspect, and some other people in the community suspect, that at least they're holding Mogadishu back as plan B if they get turned back in the north. But they won't say where they're going exactly until it's all over.
So some people hearing this perhaps might not be all that concerned with what's happening in Somalia. Mm-hmm. These people are being legally deported.
Yep.
And Somalia is where they come from. How do people in the community, the Somali community, respond to that argument? Well,
it's an excellent question. In fact, I did put that question to Hussein Ahmed, who supports deportation, but not to Mogadishu. So let me just play you a bit of our conversation. A lot of people will say, this is all something these guys should have thought about before they got involved in home invasions and stabbing people and shooting people. And really, why is it the government's responsibility to ensure their safety in any way at all?
I totally understand that sentiment. In fact, I have some of those sentiments myself. However, we also have standards. We have human rights standards in this country. And one of them is that the punishment that is meted out to someone should be proportional to their offense. We don't have a death sentence in Canada. We've moved on from that practice. So if you were to deport anyone to South and Central Somalia at this point in time, it would be tantamount to a death sentence.
So what is he proposing instead, Evan?
Well, what the community here is saying is that there is a solution to all of this, which would allow the deportations to resume, and that, of course, is to persuade Puntland and Somaliland, those two more stable regions, to reopen the doors by giving them some assistance in absorbing these people who nobody wants, obviously. It would cost some money, but, of course, it would also save money because some of these men, as I mentioned, Ali Abadir, 2 years in custody in Canada, that costs money too, and they can't be removed because of the challenges of deporting them. Here's Ahmed Hussein again.
That actually costs much, much, much less for the Canadian taxpayer to reach that agreement with these two regions, while at the same time they would finally be able to complete the deportation process, whereby now what you have is a government that's continually trying to obey the court orders for deportation, but being pushed back by the realities on the ground. The parents are actually in favor of that because they don't want their sons to just be in an indefinite Canadian detention center for how long, we don't know.
I think, Kathleen, a lot is going to depend on how this deportation that we believe is happening right now goes, the Omar Ahmed deportation. If he is safely returned to Puntland, I think that you can expect to see the government really moving aggressively to clear this backlog and push other people out of Somalia. But I think if he's dropped in Mogadishu, then you're going to see the community turning against these deportations. But they're court-ordered. I don't think that anybody's in a position to stop them.
Evan, thanks. That is the CBC's Evan Dyer.